Let's try a little sailor's hornpipe, though I haven't learned the whole thing just yet. I kind of made up the ending there. Hi everyone, in this video I'll be showing how to build a bass guitar like this. Now this is a project that I've had on my list of potential video ideas for like 7 years. I first saw a guitar like this in a video posted 7 years ago to YouTube of a guy who had built a guitar in a very similar style with a water bottle as the body and used it to play a really excellent cover of the song Iron Man. I've wanted a bass guitar made in this way ever since, and I'm really excited to finally have one. You should definitely check out that original video of the Iron Man cover, and I'll put a link in the description below because this guy plays much better than I do. So you should check out his original video to see what this sort of a guitar can really do. One thing that I especially like about this particular guitar is that this is a fretless design. Unlike my cigar box guitars that I've made in earlier videos, which do have frets on the neck, and you really do need frets on the neck of a standard scale length guitar like this. Otherwise, it's very hard to find your notes since the fret spacing is so close together. Now, measuring exactly where these frets are supposed to go along the neck can be a very tedious process. Now, fortunately, having frets is not nearly as important on a bass guitar. And in fact, having a fretless design can allow you to do some really cool things, like slide into your notes in ways that you would not be able to do with the hard stops of frets. Pretty cool sounding. Now, as it relates to actually building this guitar, having the fretless neck greatly simplifies the process. So much so that you could probably put together a guitar like this without ever picking up a tape measure or ruler, and it would probably still play just fine, even having just guessed at all the measurements. I'll still give all of the measurements that I use to build my particular instrument. Just know that there's a wide range of variability that you yourself can use and still come out with something that plays just fine. This is an easy one. You can do this project even if you've never done woodworking before. Let's get started. Well, the first things that I'll need to start building this project are the pieces of wood that I will use for the neck of the guitar. And in this case, I just have these two pieces of wood here. This longer one is 40 inches long, and this is 1.5 inches wide. Both of these pieces are 1.5 inches wide so that they sandwich together well. And it is also 3/4 of an inch thick. This will be the main body of the neck, the main bulk of the neck. And then this little piece is only 1/4 inch thick, and it's 24 inches long. I'll try to remember to put metric conversions in the video description below. But these two pieces are meant to sandwich together, with a little bit of area remaining at the top for the headstock, and lots of area remaining at the bottom for the open portion that will be just short of the bridge of the guitar. The first thing that we need to do is just glue the fingerboard to the main bulk of the neck. And you just need to decide what size headstock you want on your instrument. On my first guitar, I made the headstock very short, and the tuners are just about right next to each other. In fact, they're touching on the back of the guitar, and that turned out to be a poor design choice because sometimes with the two tuning heads touching one another, they rattle when I play the instrument. And that's no good. So on my next instrument, I'm going to make the headstock a little bit larger. So to do that, I'll just move the fingerboard a little bit further down the neck before gluing it in place. Something like that should work fine, maybe 3 or 4 inches at the top. Now, one other thing to note is if you want to make a 3 or 4 stringed instrument, you'll probably want to make your neck a little bit wider than this 1.5" that I'm using here. That's no problem if you want to do that, just use bigger pieces of wood and you're fine. To glue these two pieces together, I'll just be using a little bit of wood glue spread out over the entire length of the two pieces. And there's a huge surface area here for the glue to act upon, so you don't have to worry too much about having a ton of clamping pressure, but you should at least have enough that there's no visible seam, or that will just cause your instrument to look messy. So once the glue sets up, this is what we're left with. And you can see I've left plenty of room up here for my headstock and plenty down here for where I'll put the bridge, which will hold the strings above the fretboard of the instrument. The next step that I will need to do is drill a few holes for the tuning heads of this guitar, and I'll be using just regular bass tuners. These are just the sort of tuners you can get in any guitar store or online. You can get these on Amazon or eBay. When I made my first guitar, I used nothing but a hand drill to drill the holes for my tuning heads. And I did this just so that I could demonstrate that you don't need a drill press for this project. You can get away just fine with a hand drill. But for my new neck, I did decide to use my drill press because the holes come out just a little bit cleaner, especially when using a drill bit this large. Now with these two holes drilled for my tuning heads, which again are offset so that the tuning heads won't be touching each other in the back of the neck, I can move on to the final step before we go on to sanding this in preparation for a finish. And that is to drill 2 more holes at the base of the neck with a rather small drill bit, just so that the strings will be able to pass through the neck, and that is what will hold the strings in place on this side of the guitar. Well, now we're ready to begin sanding the neck and preparing it for a finish. And there is actually quite a lot of sanding that should be done here. It can be done by hand, but it will be really helpful if you have a power sander of some kind. What we need to do especially is get rid of any discrepancy where the two pieces of the neck, the fingerboard and the piece of maple that makes up the main bulk of the neck, wherever those don't match up perfectly. So for example, right here, I can just feel a little bit of a lip where the fingerboard is sticking up a little bit past the rest of the neck. So I want to sand that straight down so that we have a nice smooth neck. We're not going to get any splinters when we're playing this instrument. Well, here's my neck, now very nicely sanded, and it's ready to receive a finish. So I've gone ahead and hung this from my ceiling using a clothes hanger so that I can apply finish all over the neck without it contacting any other surface. And the finish I have chosen to use is shellac, and I really like this finish because the solvent is only alcohol. It's not very noxious compared to a lot of other finishes that really fill up the room you're in with the vapor. So this is what I will use. I'll just use a paintbrush to apply it, and you still do want to have at least a little bit of ventilation even when using shellac compared to other finishes. I think that looks pretty good. Applying a wood finish is kind of an art, and one that I have far from mastered. But I think this will work just fine. Looks good enough. While I'm waiting for the finish to dry on my neck, the next step that we will take is to make the nut and the bridge of the guitar. You can see these on my finished guitar. This little piece here that separates the fingerboard from the headstock, this is called the nut of the guitar, and this is meant to lift the strings just slightly above the fingerboard so that they don't buzz as you play. And on this side, we have the bridge, and you should be able to see that through the guitar's body. It's that little triangular piece of wood that the strings are sitting on. So these two pieces are very easy to make. They're made out of the same wood that this main piece of the neck is, this 3/4 by 1/2 inch maple board. And they both start as small little triangles of wood like these. And you can cut these two pieces by hand. One is a slightly larger triangle, about the full width from top to bottom as the width of the 3/4 inch thick board. And then this one is just a little bit smaller. This will be the nut. This piece, which is the bridge, takes very, very little modification. All you have to do is file 2 grooves for these strings to sit in, and it's finished. You can then apply a varnish to it if you'd like. This piece, which will be the nut, takes slightly more modification. I just trimmed down one of the edges so that it would be a little bit lower and closer to the fingerboard when I pressed it into position. And this, of course, also gets 2 grooves filed into it for the strings to sit in. I also applied a little bit of shellac to finish off these two pieces, and at this point the neck is fully dry, so I can go ahead and install the tuning heads. These fit right through the holes I drilled earlier and install permanently with the provided screws. Moving on to installing the nut and the bridge on this neck. I will do this with just a little drop of super glue on each piece. I don't want to use too much glue because you might actually want to remove these pieces eventually if you want to adjust the string height. You can lower the string height by filing the grooves in these pieces deeper, and you can raise the string height by either putting a shim underneath these pieces or replacing them entirely. The small piece of wood that I made to act as the nut of this guitar really only has one place it can go. It should be pressed right up tight against the fingerboard, separating it from the headstock. However, the bridge of the guitar has a wide range in which it could be positioned. You could position it very close to the fingerboard if you wanted a very short scale length guitar, or right down all the way up against the holes that we drilled through the neck that will hold the back end of the strings. Now, a standard scale length on a bass guitar is about 34 inches, anywhere from 32 to 34 inches. My previous guitar was the full 34. I think I'm going to make this guitar have a little bit shorter scale because I'm going to use slightly higher strings and tune them to slightly higher notes, so a short scale length will work in my favor. Now with the neck complete, I'll move on to building the body of this guitar, which of course in this video is going to be one of these large reusable water containers. As I mentioned in the start of this video, this is by no means the only body you could use for this guitar. This just happens to be an effective and interesting choice. But don't be afraid to be creative if you have other ideas for containers that might work for this. Now, the first thing that I'll do to this bottle to prepare it to act as my guitar body is to cut a hole in the side where I'll be able to place my hand to actually reach the strings. The tool I used to cut through the bottle when making my first guitar was a razor blade, but the plastic is a lot thicker than I expected, so it's much easier to use a cutting wheel on a Dremel. I started by cutting the handle out of my way on this particular bottle, and then went around again to cut out the full opening. There's no right or wrong way to do this, so long as you have an area big enough to reach your hand in to play the guitar. The neck of the bottle also needs to be cut away to make room for the strings to vibrate above the fretboard. I used a few scrap pieces of the neck material as a guide to show where to make my cuts. Again, I used the cutting wheel on my Dremel to carve away most of the plastic and finished smoothing things out with a sanding wheel. This works pretty well to remove the plastic with a little more precision. With this step finished, the bottle is ready for the guitar. It attaches just by tapping a few holes with a drill bit through the bottom of the bottle and into the neck, with some wood screws to keep them together. Up at the mouth of the bottle, I do the same by tapping holes for screws into the side of the neck, offset slightly from one another so the screws don't hit in the middle. Now that the body has been installed on this guitar, this is a completed instrument. And I have installed strings at this point. I've installed a low E and A string, the two lowest strings in a standard 4-string set of bass guitar strings. Instead of tuning these to E and A, I've tuned them to G and C, which are slightly higher notes. And I've done this because I built this guitar to a shorter than standard scale length, and so these higher notes sound a little bit better. So the first time you pick up a fretless instrument and try to figure out how to play, the most important thing to do is figure out where the frets would be if they existed on the neck. Now, to do that, we can play a number of different songs, but the most recognizable one, I think, is Smoke on the Water. This will use an open string, and then the 3rd and 5th fret position. So if we can find the notes where Smoke on the Water sounds correct, we've discovered the 3rd and 5th fret position on this instrument. So I'll start by playing the first note, just an open string. Now what I want to do from here is search for that second note of Smoke on the Water. I'll try to find that by just placing my finger somewhere down here on the neck after playing that first note. That sounds a little flat to me, so that is not the 3rd fret position. So let me try to find it by moving my finger a little further forward. That sounds pretty close to that second note of the song, so that tells me this is approximately where my 3rd fret on this guitar is. And there is the third note of the song, which falls on the 5th fret of the guitar. So just by playing those 3 notes of this song, I have discovered my 3rd and 5th fret position on this neck. And from there, when you're looking for other notes, you can just move up slightly until they sound correct for whatever song you are playing, until you have really figured out this neck and where your fingers need to go to play any song you might desire. As I'm sure you can hear, there's still a lot of room for improvement in my skill in playing this instrument, but I think the instrument itself sounds quite good. I hope you try this project for yourself. It's really not very difficult, and it requires just a saw and a drill and maybe a few files. There's really not a lot of tools required here. If you enjoyed this video, please leave me comments below. I'd love to hear from you. I read all of my comments, and it's a highlight of my day to do so. You can also support my channel on Patreon, which I would greatly appreciate, because it is hard to support these videos with just the ad revenue alone. They take a lot of time and effort. This video itself took several weeks of time to produce. So if you enjoy them, consider supporting me on Patreon. If not, that's fine too. I just want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.